sermon, From Rainbows to Montgomery. For a rainbow to form in the sky, it takes more than just one ingredient. First, there must be light. Rainbows only happen when the sun is shining. And second, there must be water, such as a rainstorm or a waterfall. And the prismatic effect that happens when sun and rain meet is marvelous, giving onlookers that, oh my goodness, feeling that we get when something magical has occurred. But there's a third ingredient that is essential to the rainbow that I'd like to lift up, and one that we often forget: perspective. For a rainbow to appear before our eyes, the sun must be behind us. We must not be looking at the sun, but in the direction of the sun's rays. We must be looking at the rain, not gazing at the source of the light, but gazing at what the light illuminates. This is the nature of justice movements as well. There are two essential ingredients. The rain is the challenges that we face, and the sun is our desire to overcome them. And yet, this third ingredient is essential: our perspective. We must not be looking at the source of light. We must not be looking towards comfort and security, because that perspective turns our back to the rain and to life's problems. We must instead align ourselves with the light and look towards where it is shining. We must bravely face the rain, and with the light as our strong ally, in alignment with that light, gaze towards what the mix of rain and light have to teach us. When rain and light merge, when we look towards the challenges of life with the eyes of love, then our problems become prisms, so that the colors of our love bend and refract, becoming an arc of beauty streaming across life's sky. And just as it takes more than one color to make a rainbow, it also takes more than one person, one perspective, one part of a movement to make a movement in its whole. Movements are more than just our headlining leaders. Movements are made up of many supporting characters wearing many hats, with the majority of us being followers. Where would our leaders be without folks to listen and heed their words? Where would they be without sources of inspiration themselves? Last week, we commemorated the birthday of a legend, Martin Luther King Jr., the leading voice in our nation's civil rights movement. And yet, we know he didn't do it alone. It's a wonderful thing to celebrate someone with such passion and drive for justice. And in fact, I believe Martin Luther King Jr., like many, has become an archetype that we can use to look to help us carry on. And yet, we shape history with our memories and our perceptions. And if we narrow in on just one leader and only one color in the spectrum of love, we lose the diverse beauty of the rainbow, and we forget that we're all in it together. We lose the layered beauty of the voices and the chorus for justice. King was inspired by many important teachers, including Gandhi, who was actually inspired by Thoreau, one of our Unitarian ancestors. And he was motivated by his community, a community of people that supported and carried him along the trail leading from Montgomery to Washington. The Montgomery bus boycott in 1955 marked the beginning of the modern civil rights movement in America. But in truth, We also know that movement didn't begin in that moment. We don't even know when it began. I don't even know if it's possible to trace its actual beginning, to be honest. Did it begin with Harriet Tubman, who helped the enslaved Africans escape to freedom? Or did it begin on the boats in Africa with women hiding seeds in their hair, dreaming of planting hope and resisting slavery in a land that was still unknown to them? When did it begin? Did it begin with the beginning of the human spirit? Can we trace the drive for justice and freedom? We know that we think of Rosa Parks as the instigator of the Montgomery bus boycott. We know that she was not, however, the first Black woman to refuse to give up her seat to a white person. There were many who led the way to get Rosa strategically positioned and her community to where they were, poised to make the next step towards justice. And even still, after that, it took that entire community collectively organizing to maintain a bus boycott lasting 381 days, more than a year, with people offering their cars as taxis and themselves as drivers, helping others get where they needed to go. For more than a year, they endured, with the light of love illuminating their path forward, shining onto the problem, breaking open hearts with the rainbow solution of a more just world. Another rainbow, another bright spot within movements is the music that carries them. So last fall, many of you know that I traveled to Montgomery for a civil rights tour. And I had the incredible experience of standing in the kitchen of Martin Luther King Jr.'s parsonage where he lived. And while I was standing in that kitchen, by his kitchen table, I listened to someone tell the story of Mahalia Jackson, who is known for being the instigator of King's I Have a Dream speech in the moment that it happened. So let me tell you a little bit about the story that I was told. So the March on Washington that day featured music by artists Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, Mahalia Jackson, Peter, Paul, and Mary, and many others. And King was the last speaker that day. Not actually because no he was some like grand finale, but because nobody else wanted to be the last speaker that day. And so nobody else wanted that spot. They figured that most of the news crews would leave before the final speaker was heard. And so King agreed to go last. And he agreed to speak for only 4 minutes. But like a good Baptist preacher, he ended up speaking for longer. He spoke for 16 minutes total, and his speech was definitely covered by the news. And what's more is that King hadn't intended on talking about the dream that day. But Mahalia Jackson, during a pause in King's words, when she noticed his energy was a little low. So the story goes, his energy was dipping, and she knew him very well because she was so often with him when he was touring and preaching. And she remembered a theme that had been coming up in other speeches that King had been making around that same time. And she, I was told, was also someone who would call, who King would call in the middle of the night when he was sitting at that kitchen table, drinking coffee at midnight to calm his nerves, alone, afraid. Martin Luther King Jr. was known to call Mahalia Jackson and ask her for a song. And she would pick one and lift his spirits and shine light on the problems, helping him make it through the night. And she would also lead those gathered in singing songs before marches and actions, and the powerful spiritual energy of the gospel music helped lift people out of fear and charge them up with inspiration to face what was ahead. And so on that particular day in Washington, from behind the podium, when Mahalia saw that Martin was just a little, what she believed, a little off, a little low, Mahalia called out to Martin from behind, from the crowd, and said, "Tell him about the dream, Martin. Tell him about the dream, Martin." And I can imagine him. I can imagine him in that moment getting maybe a gleam in his eye, rising up in his toes a little bit, coming into alignment with that source of inspiration to shine a light on the issue and to break open hearts so wide that we can still feel it today. What magic is possible, friends, when we gather together, when we help support one another and call each other on, leaders and followers, musicians and preachers, healers and activists, all aligned together for the cause of justice. We are not in this alone. What magic can happen if we keep redirecting one another's vision the way that Mahalia did that day, the way that our musicians do as they sing to us the songs of justice. So before our sermon, we listened to Peter Yarrow's account of his experience that day, and I'm going to quote him now. At that moment, Yarrow said, recalling how he felt while singing from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial during the March on Washington. At that moment, the human being was aligned with the very core of his or her soul. And all of her heart was bursting forth with a commitment that was extraordinary. And once you've had this kind of experience, your heart is so deeply connected to it, life is different. And life is still different today. It's still different now. We can still connect to that moment, even now. Life is different. Yarrow testified that America's genius is that we can change, and it can come from the people. But we have to stand up or rise up for what we believe in. And it takes courage, courage which comes from the heart. And this movement for civil rights, for a world that we believe in, where peace and justice move within us and among us as values that we cherish, that we uphold and uplift as important and guiding features of our democracy and our lives, this movement is not yesterday's. We know it is today's. This is what we are all still fighting for and dreaming of, and we must not give up on this dream or allow it to be the dream of yesterday's dreamers, because our children and the people of the future, we all still need this dream. We need to keep it alive until it becomes not some far-off fantasy, but until we dream it into being. And I believe, friends, I believe that while this might be a challenge, I believe it is possible. If it was impossible, then I know I wouldn't feel the pinpricks of excitement. I wouldn't feel the magnetism of this dream. I know if it were dead, I would feel it to have less energy. It's not dead. The dream still lives. It lives, and we shall not let it die. A few weeks ago, I woke up to the news that Peter Yarrow had died. And I decided to play some of his music in the kitchen as I made breakfast, and the world here in Virginia was blanketed with snow. And my daughter was still sleeping. The crooning voices wafted through my kitchen, and I was so overwhelmed with the energy of yearning, with the prophetic voices of yesteryear that dreamed so fervently of a better world. And I was genuinely surprised when I started crying. And even more surprised when I just had to sit down at the kitchen table and weep. I felt the music all around me and the hope and the message, knowing that the voices singing did not live to see their dream fully realized. And I was afraid that we hadn't made it and that we wouldn't make it, and that the dreamers and the visionaries who paved the way and inspired us to action were dying, are dying, and that the dream would die with them. And I wonder if maybe this is the way some people felt after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. And I shared these feelings actually with some of you later that day, and one of you helped me to realize that I was wrong. Actually, hope isn't lost. It's actually supposed to be this way. Human beings, we die. We have lifespans, and that's okay. It's an incredible thing when our dreams and visions are powerful enough to live beyond us. Can you feel that? This is the gift of legacy. This dream has been passed on to me and to us, and so has this music. And the music is part of that light, that guiding light, shining onto oppression, helping to bend the arc towards justice, refracting with the prism of hope to create rainbows across the sky of life. And it's a gift that I hope that we pass on to the people of future generations who we will never know. May we keep looking where the light guides us, friends, and may we keep looking towards the rain clouds with the sun at our backs, guiding us on. May we make prisms from our problems, and may our light ever shine until our collective dream is realized. I'd like to invite you now to just pause with me for a moment of silence in honor of Martin Luther King Jr., of Mahalia Jackson, of Rosa Parks and Harriet Tubman and Peter Yarrow, and of Bishop Mary Ann Buddy, and all those ancestors across time and those today who have lit and continue to light the way to justice. Let's pause for a moment of respect. Thank you.